Welcome to the podcast. Today with us we have Tomasz Grzywaczewski, a journalist who has spent a lot of time recording in Ukraine, and we're glad to have you with us here in the studio in Warsaw. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much for having me here.
How would you say that when you cross over the border into Ukraine, do you feel that you're entering a country which is at war, has been at war now for a long time, and it is also a war which has been described as the largest land war in Europe, or war in general, since the Second World War? Do you feel this immediately when you cross the border, or do you have to get a little bit further into the country to feel this?
I would say that war in Ukraine is a bit like an onion. It has its layers, because immediately after crossing the border, for instance, when you are getting to Lviv, you may miss that you are in the country that is into the war for 2 years, or maybe even better say for 8 years, because this war truly has started in 2014. It commenced from the illegal annexation of Crimean Peninsula by Russia and from the invasion on Donbass. So what we are observing currently, it's only another stage of this war. It's labeled full-scale invasion. However, in Lviv, you may get the feeling that the life is going on. Of course, sometimes it is interrupted by air raid alerts. It also happens that there are some missile strikes in western Ukraine. But the most vivid sign of the war is observable on the cemeteries. When you go to the graveyards, there are a lot of new graves. There are a lot of graves with Ukrainian flags that marked graves of fallen soldiers. Of course, you can feel this war when you are approaching to the front line. And I think it is super important to underline that this front line has currently about 1,000 kilometers of length. It is a huge distance.
People underestimate just how big of a country Ukraine is, which is also why they have huge problems when it comes to air defense. Because even if you have one Patriot anti-missile defense battery or two, you can protect Kiev, you can protect Kharkiv, you can protect another city, but the entire country is just so enormous that it's very difficult to protect it all.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, Ukraine is, besides Russia, the biggest country in Europe, and it is vast. Like, to travel from west to east of Ukraine, it takes you 2, sometimes 3 days. It is just a vast country, and of course, Kiev is the best protected of the big towns in Ukraine. I could even say that supposedly Kiev is the safest place in Ukraine right now, but it is absolutely impossible for Ukrainian air defense to protect cities all over the Ukraine, or to protect some small towns. Even today, last night, there was an airstrike to Pavlohrad. This is a middle-sized town between Dnipro and Donbass. A few people were killed. And it is not because Ukrainians don't want to protect Pavlohrad. It's impossible just to protect all middle towns. And Russians very often attack randomly.
And when it comes to air defense, there is also the problem that Ukraine started the war with their S-300 missiles as air defense system, but they are starting to run out of those missiles. And now they are more and more reliant on Western air defense. So the NASAMS, the Patriots, the Arrows, the various missile systems that have been sent to them. But it is only compensating for some of the air defense that they already had previously. It's not like they have received so much that they can simply protect their entire airspace.
Yep, and what is also pretty important is that currently Russians are amassing both missiles and kamikaze drones like Iranian Shahed, and they usually first send Shaheds to force air defense to strike, and in the next phase of attack they are sending guided missiles, and allegedly Ukraine will be in a huge need of supplies of air defense systems for months or maybe for years. So it poses the question for how long Western countries are going to be eager to provide this super expensive advanced anti-missile and anti-aircraft munition.
And here is another important issue, which is that the F-16 planes, which we're all waiting for, they should arrive sometime in the spring. They also have a capacity to shoot down cruise missiles, so they can protect also the country, not just attack Russian targets, but also help protect the skies over Ukraine. So hopefully, all together with more air defense systems, more planes, the situation will become better. But as you mentioned, they have been saving up a little bit in previous months. They didn't fire that many cruise missiles, the Kinzhals and so on. It looks like they have been waiting for cold weather, and now the winter is here. What do you think? How will this winter look like for Ukraine?
It's going to be harsh. That's for sure. There are no doubts that Russians were stockpiling guided missiles and drones to hit during the winter, trying to destroy critical infrastructures, power plants, and just trying to freeze Ukrainian people to death. It happened last year. Last year I was in December. I was also this year in February in Ukraine, and there were air raids alarms like blowing up constantly. It was like one huge air raid alarm that was turned on in Ukraine. And fortunately, last year, Ukrainian authorities has managed to provide enough of anti-aircraft missiles munition and their electric grid and power plants survived. This year, it is not so obvious.
Yeah, they did not manage to rebuild everything that was destroyed last winter during the summer. So we will have to see exactly how severe the damages will be this year. Fortunately, also, Ukraine, yesterday there was this attack that you mentioned earlier. There was one energy power plant that was destroyed, and it made simply there wasn't enough energy in the Ukrainian energy system. So they had to ask Poland, Moldova, Romania for help. Unfortunately, some of that energy can still come from our countries here in the West. So it's a team effort, as they say. And this is not just for energy, it comes to the war in general. Right now, there are the discussions whether the American Congress will be able to pass another big military aid package for Ukraine. Apparently, they're fighting over whether the border issue will be included in this or not. You have also been spending a lot of time in the US now. How would you say that the debate is going in America? Can we expect another package to come?
It's pretty hard to predict what congressmen are going to do. Hopefully, yes. However, when I am talking with ordinary people, sometimes with my friends or some experts, but also like regular citizens, the problem is that Ukraine is not more on the top of the political agenda. It is a bit like a forgotten war. People are in general tired of news from Ukraine because there is this perception that all quiet to the Eastern Front. And I think that it is a pretty obvious comparison to, of course, famous Remarque book, All Quiet to the Western Front and First World War, is very true. Because, of course, it is very difficult to keep people interested in a war where the front line is
practically not moving for months.
Practically not moving. This is, of course, this is a trench war. Even though every day, even during this interview, the people are dying there. Ukrainian soldiers at this very moment are being killed somewhere there in the trenches. However, there are no like spectacular events, spectacular news. Okay, you mentioned destroying power plant. I mentioned some attacks. Yeah, okay, but this is like, oh yeah, it's another missile strike. Nothing interesting. Of course, if Russian hit residential block and kill, 50 people, yeah, this is it may be a breaking news.
1 or 2 days.
Yeah. Oh, you're optimistic.
Yeah.
I would say a couple of hours. And this is what Russians currently, this is also the Russian, I would say, propaganda strategy. They don't want right now to start like massive airstrike against civilian targets because they don't want world to keep an eye on what's happening. They are trying to slowly grid both Ukrainian soldiers and military capabilities. And unfortunately, Russia is well prepared for long-lasting warfare.
Yes, this is another difference that they didn't do it immediately, but after a while they did put their economy on a war footing. And naturally, they have a much larger capacity than Ukraine itself. But there were some people in the West that hoped that at least the European Union and America, the closest allies of Ukraine, those who have been sending the most military aid, that they will also change their economy slightly more on a war footing, that there would be more artillery shells produced, more offensive weapons such as infantry fighting vehicles, tanks, and so on. But we really haven't seen this increase in production. Why do you think that people in the West are so reluctant to change their reality when it comes to the war in Ukraine?
I think we have two factors. First is that people in Western countries can't believe that great war can happen. I mean, they maybe love to watch movies about the war or some apocalyptic movies, but they can't believe that it can happen in reality.
Yeah, this is only World War II, Band of Brothers, but today in 2020, 2023,
no, it can't.
Impossible.
We live in an age of love, peacefulness, friendship, and that's it. So the war can't happen. The second problem is that, especially in the West, but however also in Europe, people hasn't experienced war in their own homelands for decades. So there is no collective memory of atrocities of war crimes against civilian population. In Poland, it is easier to comprehend because we still cultivate the memory of the victims of the Second World War, of the victims of communism, the victims of Soviet regime. But even though sometimes for people in Poland,
even
it's
here they're forgetting.
hard to imagine that, it can repeat. And I'm a bit afraid that it may repeat. I mean, war can knock also to our gates. And this is because of Russian politicians, but also Russian society mindset that is deeply imperialistic and deeply colonial.